The message from Jerusalem arrived at the White House in the early hours of the morning, and the officials who received it were left in no doubt about what it meant. It was not phrased as an ultimatum in the technical diplomatic sense. There was no explicit deadline, no stated consequence attached to non-compliance, but everyone who read it understood what it was. Israel was telling America that it intended to act against Iran with or without American support, and that it was giving Washington a defined window of time in which to decide whether to join the operation or to stand aside. The phrasing, according to officials familiar with the communication, was careful and considered, the product of a government that knows exactly how to talk to Washington and that had thought carefully about how to frame a message that was, at its core, a statement that a close American ally had made a decision that would reshape the entire region regardless of what the United States chose to do about it. This is not how alliances are supposed to work. This is not how America and Israel have historically conducted their relationship. And the fact that it happened, that Israel sent this message in these terms at this moment, tells you more about the current state of the world than almost anything else in this crisis. To understand why Israel made this move, you have to understand the specific terror that drives Israeli strategic thinking in a way that is genuinely difficult for people who don't live under existential military threat to fully internalize. Israel is a country of under 10 million people, surrounded by populations that number in the hundreds of millions, in a region where multiple state and non-state actors have explicitly stated their intention to destroy it. For most of Israel's history, the existential threat has been manageable because the weapons available to Israel's enemies, while dangerous, were not capable of threatening the country's existence in a single strike. That calculus changes if Iran acquires nuclear weapons. A single nuclear weapon detonated over Tel Aviv would kill more people than the entire population of pre-war Europe's Jewish community. That is not a hypothetical that Israeli strategic planners treat as remote or theoretical. It is the central organizing fact of Israeli national security thinking. Everything else, the proxy wars, the conventional military operations, the intelligence operations, the diplomatic maneuvering, is ultimately subordinate to the imperative of preventing Iran from acquiring the capability to threaten Israel's existence with a single weapon. Israeli intelligence has concluded, according to what has been communicated to American counterparts, that Iran is closer to nuclear weapons capability than American intelligence currently assesses. This is not a new disagreement. Israel and the United States have historically had different assessments of Iranian nuclear timelines, with Israel consistently taking a more alarmed view and pushing for earlier action. What is different now is the margin of the disagreement and the urgency that attaches to it. Israeli officials are now communicating, through multiple channels, that they believe Iran's timeline to a weapons capability has compressed in ways that make waiting for American decision-making processes to run their course strategically unacceptable. In plain language, Israel believes it cannot afford to wait for America to make up its mind. And having reached that conclusion, Israel is doing what states do when they believe their existence is at stake: acting. The specific ask that Israel has communicated to Washington is not simply that America stay out of the way. It is more complicated and more demanding than that. Israel wants American support, logistical, intelligence, and potentially operational, for a strike that would be far larger than anything Israel has conducted previously against Iranian targets. Previous Israeli strikes against Iranian interests, the operations against Iranian weapons convoys in Syria, the sabotage operations against Iranian nuclear facilities that have been attributed to Israel, even the recent strikes against Tehran itself, were all conducted within the bounds of what Israel's own military capability could achieve acting alone. What Israel is now planning, if the communications to Washington are taken at face value, is something different in scale and ambition. It is a campaign, not a strike. A sustained effort to degrade Iranian military, nuclear, and command infrastructure to a degree that sets back Iranian capabilities by a generation. Such a campaign would require more aircraft than Israel has, more munitions than Israel's stockpiles currently contain, and intelligence support that goes beyond what Israel can generate on its own. Without American support, the operation is possible but significantly less effective. With American support, it becomes a different kind of military action entirely. The American response to Israel's communication has been, by all accounts, a mixture of alarm, frustration, and reluctant understanding. Alarm because no government likes to be maneuvered by an ally into a position where its choices are reduced to either supporting an operation it didn't choose or being seen as abandoning its closest Middle Eastern partner at the moment of maximum crisis. Frustration because the entire American approach to the Iran situation has been premised on retaining control of the timing and nature of any military action. And Israel's communication effectively seizes that control from Washington. And reluctant understanding because American officials, looking at the intelligence Israel is operating on, and the genuine security concerns that drive Israeli calculations, cannot simply dismiss the Israeli position as unreasonable. They understand why Israel has reached the conclusions it has reached. They don't fully agree with those conclusions, but they understand them. That understanding and the inability to simply tell Israel it's wrong is what makes the situation so genuinely difficult. The domestic political dimension in both countries is adding further complications to an already complicated picture. In Israel, the political pressure for military action is intense and comes from multiple directions simultaneously. The government coalition includes parties that have been pushing for decisive action against Iran for years and would view any retreat from the current posture as a political catastrophe. The military and intelligence establishment, while more cautious in some respects than the political leadership, has its own institutional reasons for preferring action to continued waiting. And the Israeli public, which has now experienced multiple rounds of Iranian missile attacks and the constant awareness of the threat from Hezbollah in the north, is in a psychological state that strongly favors decisive action over indefinite tension. The Israeli government is not acting against the preferences of its population, it is acting with them, and in some ways because of them. In the United States, the political picture is more complex, but not more supportive of restraint than might be expected. The American political establishment, both parties, with some exceptions, has historically been strongly supportive of Israel. The argument that America should support Israeli military action against an Iran that has been attacking American forces and threatening American interests is not a hard argument to make in the American political context. The harder argument, the one that military professionals and some senior officials are trying to make, is that supporting Israeli operations on Israel's timeline and according to Israel's strategic logic, rather than America's own assessment and timeline, compromises American strategic autonomy in ways that could have serious consequences. That argument is technically correct and politically difficult. In American politics, being seen as the person who held Israel back from defending itself is rarely a winning position. What are the specific scenarios that could unfold from Israel's communication? The first is that America decides to fully support the Israeli operation, providing the intelligence, logistics, munitions, and potentially the operational air power that Israel has requested. This turns the operation from an Israeli action with American support into something that is functionally a joint American-Israeli military campaign against Iran. From a military effectiveness standpoint, this is the most capable option. From a diplomatic and political standpoint, it is the most escalatory. It removes any ambiguity about American involvement and makes every subsequent Iranian decision about retaliation a decision about responding to both Israel and America simultaneously. The second scenario is that America provides partial support, some intelligence, some logistics, some munitions, but not direct operational participation. This is the attempt to have it both ways, to help Israel achieve its objectives while maintaining some political distance from the operation. The problem with this scenario is that it satisfies neither side fully. Israel doesn't get all the support it needs, and America doesn't get the distance it's trying to maintain. The third scenario is that America tells Israel no, that it will not support the operation and requests that Israel delay until American decision-making processes can produce a coordinated plan. This is the scenario that American diplomatic and some military officials would prefer. It is also the scenario that Israeli officials have communicated, with varying degrees of explicitness, they are not willing to accept. The fourth scenario, and the one that some analysts consider most likely given the specific dynamics at play, is a negotiated division of labor. America and Israel reaching a quiet agreement about who does what, when, and under what conditions. Under this arrangement, Israel would conduct operations within its own capability and on a timeline it controls, while America would provide specific forms of support, position forces to deter Iranian escalation against American assets, and manage the diplomatic and international fallout. Neither government would publicly characterize this as a joint operation because neither government wants to be seen as having given the other control over its decision-making. But the operational reality would be one of close coordination. This kind of quiet division of labor is not unprecedented. America and Israel have operated this way before, in contexts where both governments wanted to maintain some degree of public distance while working toward compatible objectives. The allies watching this from outside are increasingly alarmed by what they're seeing, and their alarm is worth taking seriously because Allied support, or the absence of it, will matter significantly for what comes after whatever military operations occur. The Gulf states, which have been trying to maintain workable relationships with both America and Iran, are now being forced to make choices they've been trying to avoid. If Israel conducts a large-scale military operation against Iran, with American support, from assets that transit or are supported by facilities in Gulf states, those Gulf states become implicated in the conflict regardless of their stated positions. That implication carries real security consequences. Iran will hold them responsible, and the consequences of Iranian retaliation against Gulf energy infrastructure are felt globally. The Europeans, already frustrated by the lack of consultation on American strategy, are even more alarmed by the prospect of being presented with a fait accompli by an Israeli government whose strategic logic they don't fully share, and whose decision-making they have even less ability to influence than they have over Washington's. The most important question in the entire situation is one that nobody can answer from the outside. What is actually happening in the conversations between Israeli and American officials right now? The formal diplomatic communications are one thing. The real decisions are being made in conversations between people who know each other well enough to be direct, who share enough intelligence to have a common factual picture, and who understand each other's constraints and imperatives well enough to navigate toward outcomes that both can live with. Those conversations are happening. The people having them are experienced and serious. Whether their experience and seriousness are equal to the magnitude of the choices being made is a question that only the outcome can answer. What we know is that Israel has communicated its intentions. America is processing those intentions. And the window for the kind of coordinated decision-making that produces better outcomes than uncoordinated ones is open, but not indefinitely. Decisions made under time pressure, in crisis conditions, by governments that are simultaneously managing domestic politics, alliance relationships, military readiness, and intelligence assessments. Those decisions are rarely as good as the decisions made without those pressures. But they're the decisions that history actually turns on. And history is turning on them right now.